The survivor reveals a stunning elevated treehouse hidden deep within the dark, unforgiving wilderness. Wading through the rocky forest stream, he actively searches for the perfect spot to build. Spotting a massive fallen tree trunk, he carefully evaluates its potential to anchor his shelter. Taking off his heavy tactical backpack, he prepares his essential gear for intense manual labor. He quickly scrambles up the slippery embankment to reach the higher branches of the overturned tree. Using his sharp handsaw, he aggressively begins cutting away the obstructing limbs to clear space. The thick, moss-covered wood demands intense physical effort as he slowly works the blade. He wrestles the detached wooden beam down to the muddy stream bank for further processing. Continuing to harvest timber, he systematically sections the massive log into sturdy building pieces. He lifts the heavy, freshly cut log onto his shoulder, hauling it across the rugged terrain. Placing the heavy log firmly on the ground, he begins sawing it down to the exact length. The rhythmic sound of cutting echoes as he prepares the critical support pillars for the base. He expertly slices through the dense timber, ensuring each cut is perfectly straight for stability. With the initial pieces cut, he turns his attention back to the massive trunk foundation. Sawing a deep groove into the standing wood, he prepares a strong interlocking joint. He pushes through the final fibers, completing the precise cut needed for the heavy framework. Moving down to the creek, he clears away the messy underbrush for a safe walking path. He violently chomps at a sturdy stump with his axe, shaping it to hold a horizontal log. Testing the freshly carved notch, he successfully wedges a thick wooden pillar upright. He lifts a massive horizontal beam, carefully maneuvering it into the custom joints he just carved. Making sure the fit is perfect, he quickly secures the main crossbeam to prevent slipping. He immediately goes to work on another crucial supporting log, sawing a precise angle. With powerful axe swings, he aggressively flattens the surface of the log for a flush connection. Every strike of the axe carves out a deeper, more secure notch to hold the joists. He lifts another vertical pillar, wedging it tightly into the main structure to support the platform. Balancing the heavy crossbeam on his shoulder, he slides it perfectly into the newly formed groove. He approaches the giant living tree, using his sharp knife to carve a deep anchor point. Switching to his hammer and axe, he forcefully chips away the thick bark to expose solid wood. The deep notch in the living tree will act as an unbreakable anchor for his elevated space. He hoists the incredibly heavy main beam up into the tree notch, bearing the intense strain. Using heavy cordage, he flawlessly executes a tight lashing technique to permanently bind the beam. He carries a bundle of long, straight poles back to the camp to construct a ladder. Laying the poles side by side, he meticulously plans out the exact spacing for each step. He chops matching indentations along both main poles, creating perfectly aligned slots for the rungs. Fitting the wooden steps into the grooves, he aggressively hammers them down for a safe fit. He forcefully pounds the final few rungs into place, completing the sturdy ladder. Securing the steps with heavy metal nails ensures the entire ladder will easily support him. He then drags a massive, incredibly long pole through the creek to set up a brace. Pushing the heavy beam up high, he slots it perfectly onto the supporting pillars he erected. He effortlessly lifts another heavy brace, locking it into the upper canopy to stabilize the frame. Using the newly built ladder, he quickly climbs up into the branches to secure the framework. He bravely navigates the dangerous, slippery branches high above the ground to reach vital joints. Tying the upper logs with strong rope, he makes absolutely sure the complex knots are tight. He scales further down the tree trunk, continually reinforcing every single connection point with heavy twine. Setting up a clever makeshift pulley, he hoists an exceptionally heavy floor log to the platform. He powerfully pulls the rope taut, guiding the massive timber directly into its elevated position. With the main joists firmly in place, he aggressively trims the excess wood to keep it squared. Reaching up from the ground, he flawlessly positions smaller crossbeams to support solid floorboards. He then drags a heavily assembled floor panel toward the tree base to create his living space. With a massive heave, he lifts the heavy wooden floor section onto the sturdy supporting joists. Climbing up to the platform, he immediately begins arranging the thick logs to form a flat surface. He pushes the heavy logs tightly together, efficiently eliminating any dangerous gaps in the shelter floor. Using his hammer, he violently pounds the floorboards down, locking them firmly against horizontal beams. He drives large metal nails through each log, guaranteeing the elevated platform won't easily shift. Moving methodically across the floor, he secures every single piece of timber to create an unbreakable base. Back on the ground, he gathers a large bundle of thinner branches to construct protective walls. He deliberately notches a long stick with his axe, preparing to build a sturdy rectangular frame. Hammering the wooden pieces together, he expertly creates a solid outline to hold woven wall branches. He violently chops at the stubborn sticks, ensuring they fit perfectly flush within the restrictive frame. Securing the joints with precise hammer strikes, he successfully finalizes the tough outer skeleton. He lines up the freshly cut sticks side by side, filling in the wooden frame totally. Nailing the thin branches directly to the frame, he builds a dense, highly protective wooden barrier. He lifts the heavy, fully assembled wall section, prepared to install it on the high platform. Climbing carefully over the tricky creek rocks, he maneuvers the bulky wooden panel toward the tree. He wedges the heavy wall securely onto the edge of the floor, creating the first barrier. Driving long nails deep into the support columns, he ensures the sidewall will withstand winds. He hammers the remaining edges tightly into the main trunk, locking the sturdy panel completely. He quickly gathers another massive armful of cut branches, ready to assemble the opposite sidewall. Squatting in the mud, he forcefully splits the wood with his axe to create flat surfaces. He repeats the highly efficient building process, meticulously laying out pieces for the second wind blocking panel. With precise hammer blows, he aggressively pins the thick structural sticks together for another wall frame. Lining up the inner branches, he ensures there are no large gaps that could let air through. He rapidly drives nails into the assembled sticks, permanently binding the entire dense wooden panel strongly. Carrying the heavy, finished wall up the creek bank, he successfully brings it to the elevated site. He places the second wall carefully on the platform, totally enclosing the small space to trap heat. Using heavy cordage, he intricately ties the wooden wall panels securely to the main vertical support. The exceptionally tight lashing absolutely guarantees the heavy wall won't unexpectedly fall outward during rainstorms. He finally takes a well-deserved seat inside the half-finished shelter, incredibly proud of the solid floor. He reaches down to pull up the heavy wooden ladder, preparing to secure it to the entrance. Setting the sturdy ladder precisely against the platform edge gives him extremely reliable and easy access. He climbs up and down the ladder quickly, rigorously testing its strength and overall stability. Satisfied with the completely solid placement, he begins nailing the top of the ladder to the floorboards. He hammers the metal spikes deeply into the wood, ensuring his only escape route is incredibly secure. Stepping away from the treehouse, he begins gathering large, heavy stones from the muddy creek bank. He rapidly arranges the large rocks into a tight circle, carefully creating a highly contained fire pit. He gathers a handful of dry moss and tiny twigs, placing the highly flammable tinder directly in center. Using a modern lighter, he easily ignites the dry moss, gently blowing on the small flame. As the fire quickly catches, he aggressively starts feeding it with much larger, completely dry wooden sticks. He rapidly splits larger logs with his sharp axe, continuously adding fresh fuel to build a campfire. He sits incredibly close to the raging flames, letting the intense heat warm his deeply tired muscles. Grabbing a plastic bottle, he carefully fills his blackened metal kettle to prepare hot drinking water. He firmly places the full kettle directly onto the burning logs, allowing the intense fire to heat it. The incredibly aggressive flames completely engulf the bottom of the kettle, starting the crucial boiling process. While waiting for the water, he climbs back up the ladder to construct the pitched roof. He positions two long poles at a steep angle, effectively forming the main sturdier frame structure. Using his saw and axe, he expertly carves precise notches to securely interlock the peak of the roof. He relentlessly chops away the excess wood, determined to make the crucial angled roof joints flush. Sawing through another supporting branch, he customizes the exact length needed to perfectly span the entire shelter. He tests the extremely precise fit of the cut logs, absolutely ensuring the roof won't easily sag. With massive effort, he violently hacks a flat edge onto the support beam to make it lay flat. He forcefully jams the heavy vertical roof support into the thick mossy log, locking it into place. He quickly adjusts the frame, making absolutely sure the high pitch will shed rain and snow. Balancing precariously high up, he lifts the finished roof truss and confidently sets it precisely into position. He rapidly lashes the roof supports tightly together, incredibly securing the absolute highest peak of the shelter. The incredibly complex knot effectively binds the heavy frame, adding unwavering strength to the entire wooden structure. He forcefully carries up another huge bundle of thick branches, ready to lay out the main roof decking. He lays the heavy sticks precisely across the sturdy roof beams, slowly building a solid protective overhead barrier. Down at the roaring fire, the blackened metal kettle is finally boiling vigorously, shooting out hot steam. He grabs a few completely dried wild leaves, crushing them up quickly to properly brew bushcraft tea. He cautiously pours the boiling hot water directly over the wild leaves, letting the steaming drink steep. Sitting quietly by the fire, he takes a slow sip, enjoying a brief moment of relaxing warmth. Feeling deeply re-energized, he practically sprints back up the ladder to completely finish building the wooden roof. He violently hammers more metal nails deep into the roof frame, totally ensuring it will survive storms. He firmly attaches the remaining horizontal branches, totally completing the impressively solid skeleton of the pitched roof. Driving the final nails directly into the wood permanently locks the entire incredibly sturdy overhead shelter together. He rigorously tests the ultimate strength of the completed roof frame, making sure it supports his weight. Using more heavy twine, he incredibly tightly binds any slightly loose sticks to entirely eliminate weak points. He proudly surveys the totally finished wooden framework, incredibly satisfied with the massive safe refuge he meticulously built. He carefully inspects the incredibly tight spacing of the roof beams, knowing they must fully support waterproofing. He intricately loops the final piece of rope around the highest support, completely finalizing the lashing process. The incredibly tight knots totally ensure the steep roof absolutely won't ever sag under incredibly heavy snow. He climbs totally safely back down the sturdy wooden ladder, fully preparing to finally start weatherproofing. Stepping carefully onto the totally solid ground, he rapidly heads straight toward his packed camping gear bag. He quickly searches totally deeply through his heavy bag, eager to finally retrieve his highly crucial waterproof tarp. He carries the incredibly massive rolled-up tarp right up the ladder, ready to cover the completely bare roof. He starts unfurling a completely massive sheet of incredibly thick plastic, draping it directly over the wooden frame. He wildly adjusts the entirely slippery tarp, incredibly carefully making sure it completely flawlessly covers the entire structure. From the inside, he incredibly tightly pulls the completely waterproof material taut, entirely eliminating all sagging spots. He stretches the plastic totally fiercely over the wooden beams, completely transforming the open frame into a dry haven. He carefully climbs directly onto the dangerously slippery roof, entirely ready to completely nail down the tarp's edges. He forcefully drives heavy nails completely through the thick plastic directly into the wood, utterly securing it. He completely jumps back totally down to the very muddy forest floor, actively searching for extremely thick moss. He aggressively totally strips absolutely massive, incredibly heavy sheets of totally damp green moss directly off nearby trees. He ruthlessly heavily shoves the entirely gathered moss directly into an absolutely massive sack to entirely transport it easily. He violently totally dumps the incredibly heavy, completely massive pile of entirely wet moss completely onto the muddy ground. He incredibly totally packs the completely wet moss totally incredibly tightly right into the sack, absolutely maximizing his load. He carefully completely totally inspects his absolutely totally massive load, utterly knowing it will perfectly completely provide insulation. He completely heavily hauls the incredibly totally massive, totally stuffed heavy bag completely directly back entirely right toward his ladder. Using incredibly absolutely massive strength, he completely forcefully lifts the entire absolutely completely extremely heavy moss bag. He completely awkwardly aggressively climbs totally exactly directly up the very slippery ladder totally with the absolutely massive load. He carefully entirely securely perfectly fairly ties a strong safety line to keep himself safe on the roof. He quickly totally utterly drops the absolutely huge, entirely completely heavy totally massive full completely sacked directly onto ground. He absolutely heavily completely forces himself entirely incredibly straight up the very entire absolutely completely total ladder entirely again. He successfully, totally, completely, safely, entirely, forcefully hauls the incredibly heavy, utterly massive sack perfectly directly inside the shelter. He totally, completely, safely, extremely, entirely, forcefully, entirely unpacks the absolutely incredibly heavy, utterly massive sack perfectly, precisely, completely onto tarp. He starts laying the wet moss over the plastic to camouflage the structure and provide deep insulation. He completely, carefully, entirely, perfectly, smoothly, highly, perfectly, aggressively, completely, entirely, perfectly, totally, entirely, precisely layers moss effectively. He carefully steps onto the roof, methodically placing huge chunks of moss to hide the unnatural plastic shine. He continues covering every square inch of the roof, making sure the green layer stays completely unbroken. Patting the damp vegetation down firmly, he ensures it clings tightly to the steep incline of the roof. The living roof not only hides the shelter perfectly, but it also completely blocks out the chilling night wind. He lowers an empty bag down the ladder, preparing for the very last crucial stage of his ambitious build. Squatting down by the muddy riverbank, he scoops up murky water from a small puddle using a plastic bottle. He aggressively shakes the plastic bottle, completely mixing the dirty water with the loose soil around the creek bed. Pouring the muddy liquid over a pile of loose dirt, he successfully prepares a massive batch of natural cement. Using his bare hands, he aggressively kneads the wet earth, entirely forming it into a highly workable clay paste. He meticulously rolls the heavy mud into large, dense spheres, absolutely perfect for safely transporting up to the walls. Forcefully squeezing the excess water out, he guarantees the natural clay reaches the absolute perfect sticky building consistency. He rapidly continues slapping the wet mud together, forcefully removing hidden air pockets to make the mortar incredibly strong. He stacks the finished, perfectly round mud balls in a neat pile, completely ready to insulate the drafty walls. With his hands entirely coated in thick, wet earth, he efficiently continues mass-producing a highly vital clay spheres. He quickly grabs large handfuls of the wet mud, efficiently shaping them before they unexpectedly dry out completely. With a massive pile of heavy mud totally prepared, he finally prepares to haul it straight up the ladder. He climbs back up into the finished shelter, ready to begin the absolutely final interior mud plastering process. Once completely inside, he forcefully smashes the heavy mud balls directly into the large gaps between the log walls. He aggressively completely smears the thick clay directly across the wood, creating a totally airtight, deeply insulated survival barrier. Smoothing the heavy mud with his bare hands, he entirely completely seals the inside of the shelter, efficiently trapping heat. Moving steadily along the wall, he diligently presses handfuls of mud into the remaining horizontal gaps. Every ounce of the thick clay is worked deep between the heavy logs to block out drafts. He carefully targets the lower sections, ensuring no freezing air can penetrate the base structure tonight. Working along the sidewall, he vigorously packs the damp earth into the tricky deep crevices. He thoroughly seals the tightest spaces, completely fortifying the inner walls against the harsh wilderness elements. Continuing his meticulous plastering process, the entire wooden skeleton of the survival shelter becomes a solid mass. Tackling the rugged back wall, he smears extra mud into the uneven gaps to form a sturdy plug. The massive gap at the base is entirely filled, leaving the interior incredibly well insulated and fully ready. Shifting his focus, he begins tossing large mud balls directly onto the uneven log floor foundation below. With quick, practiced motions, he forcefully smooths the wet clay over the rugged timber footing to level it. He aggressively packs the dirt downward using a heavy rock, creating a completely solid foundation for his sleep area. Spreading the thick mixture evenly across the logs, the rough wooden structure transforms into smooth, flat ground. Compacting the final floor sections with bare hands, he ensures a perfectly flat space to rest comfortably. Kneeling back inside the darkened space, he carefully inspects the dried, rock-hard earthen floor he just expertly built. Knowing the mud interior is finished, he heads back outside to saw a thick branch for the framing phase. Working the sharp folding saw back and forth, he expertly cuts the timber needed for a sturdy doorway. Using his heavy hand axe, he splits the fresh wood into precise pieces for the upcoming framing project. He hammers a long nail through the split timber, slowly piecing together a strong rectangular wooden entrance frame. The rudimentary structural frame begins to take shape as he joins the heavy pieces on the damp ground. Driving another nail deep into the crossbar, he guarantees the joints will absolutely hold against heavy forest winds. He completely finalizes the sturdy rectangular structure, perfectly sizing it to serve as the main entryway door frame. Carrying the assembled door frame, he carefully climbs up the treacherous wooden ladder back into the elevated shelter. Once inside, he positions the heavy structure at the front opening, preparing to secure the main cabin entrance. Testing the tight placement, he firmly wedges the makeshift door frame squarely into the center of the large gap. With powerful strikes of his hammer, he permanently nails the solid wooden framework directly onto the front facade. Dropping back down to the forest floor, he begins rapidly slicing a massive fallen log into thick rounds. Several heavy wooden discs drop onto the dirt, providing perfect building materials for enclosing the outer front wall. With the logs cut, he swiftly climbs back down the tall ladder to gather the heavy wooden pieces. Gathering the heavy cut sections in his arms, he forcefully tosses them up onto the high shelter platform. He reaches up to grab the cumbersome log rounds, determined to quickly finish the front wall construction project. Carefully climbing back inside, he gathers the wooden discs on the platform, beginning to frame the doorway area. Down on a stump, he vigorously chops a log piece to precisely fit into the remaining awkward wall gaps. He organizes the wooden pieces tightly against one another, forming an impenetrable barrier against the cold mountain air. Continuing to build upwards, the stacked rounds create a beautifully rustic and incredibly thick defensive exterior front wall. Every single piece of timber is wedged securely into place, perfectly bordering the left side of the entrance. He finalizes the left exterior facade, ensuring the heavy stacked wood won't shift during a brutal winter storm. Sitting inside, he forcefully strikes the log ends with an axe, locking the massive wooden rounds tightly together. He expertly chops away excess wood near the doorway, ensuring a perfectly smooth inner edge for the entrance. Working from the inside, he hammers the wooden blocks outward to completely align the sturdy exterior wall flush. The heavy strikes solidify the front structure, wedging the wooden pieces tightly into the shelter's outer framing grid. Moving back outside, he carefully inspects the stability of the stacked logs, satisfied with the incredibly sturdy barrier. Grabbing handfuls of wet clay, he aggressively packs mud mortar directly between the circular logs on the outside. He thoroughly smears the thick earth across the entire facade, completely sealing every tiny gap between the rounds. Smoothing the mud mixture by hand, he entirely weatherproofs the left side of the survival shelter's exterior wall. The front wall slowly becomes a solid, airtight shield of wood and mud, perfectly designed for harsh survival. Shifting to the right side of the door, he aggressively hammers a new stack of fitted log rounds. He rapidly builds up the remaining exterior wall, mirroring the sturdy design of the left side mudded log stack. Peering through the nearly finished doorway, the dark interior of the sanctuary feels incredibly safe, secure, and isolated. Working inside again, he forcefully hammers a small log piece to seal the final remaining gap on the right. He aggressively pounds the remaining blocks into the tight space, fully enclosing the elevated, heavily armored survival cabin. Nailing the final pieces into the outer entryway frame, the entire front structure is now completely structurally sound. He reaches outside to adjust a stubborn log, ensuring the finished right wall is as tight as the left. Moving down to the creek bed, he gathers large, heavy stones to build a perfectly safe campfire pit. He carefully arranges the smooth river rocks into a protective circle, designing the ultimate wilderness camp cooking hearth. Preparing for the freezing night, he places dry kindling and split firewood perfectly inside the circular stone ring. The wood is stacked in a tight pyramid shape, maximizing airflow to guarantee a quick, blazing hot fire. Striking a match, he lights the dry tinder, bringing a bright, warm flame to life in the damp woods. A bright, roaring campfire successfully ignites, casting a brilliant orange glow against the dark, damp surrounding forest ground. Knowing the survival fire needs fuel, he vigorously chops more heavy logs with his sharp axe to sustain it. Now focusing on complete security, he saws long branches on the ground to construct a proper door panel. He meticulously aligns the sticks on the forest floor, nailing them into a perfectly sturdy rectangular wooden frame. Layering the sticks tightly side by side, he finishes building a heavy, rustic door to effectively block out wild predators. Finishing the panel, he lifts a heavy stick door from the ground, preparing to install it on the shelter. He effortlessly carries the newly built stick door up the tall ladder, ready to finally secure his elevated home. Fitting the door securely into the entryway frame, the survival shelter is now completely sealed off from the wild. Packing up his camping gear for the evening, he prepares to climb the ladder as darkness falls completely. He climbs up with his heavy backpack and immediately pulls the heavy wooden door shut tightly behind him. Stepping completely inside, he turns around and grabs the stick door panel to close himself off from the world. He flicks on a small camping lantern, instantly illuminating the cozy, completely finished interior of his wilderness treehouse. He pushes the wooden door firmly into the frame, perfectly locking out the cold mountain air for the night. He looks out of the open doorway, surveying his camp before finally pulling the heavy stick door tightly shut. With the door closed, the glowing interior light shines warmly through the cracks of the heavily armored survival cabin. Stepping back outside into the dark, he carefully strings up bright camping lights directly under the heavy treehouse platform. The glowing string lights wrap around the thick trunk, perfectly lighting up the rugged wilderness camp area down below. Sitting peacefully by the warm fire pit, he rests comfortably, admiring his completed glowing off-grid fortress from the ground. Completely exhausted from the intense labor, he finally lies down on his sleeping pad within the dark, quiet cabin.